three things that you need essentially. You can get along with one of them barely. If you have two things, it's good. If you have all three, that's great. Namely, the one thing is you can be an expert. If you're an expert in the field, that's already a great start, right? You could have the money. If you have a bunch of money, that's already a great start as well. You can buy the expertise, or you can have the right connections, which is another hugely important piece.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of the Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com. Grab some time with us to chat. Now, today we have another great guest on the podcast, Victor Hogrefe, and I am sure I slaughtered his last name, but that is my best attempt. So Victor, as you can tell, may not have grown up in the U.S., actually grew up in Germany, came to the U.S. for college, studied philosophy, but decided the field was too politically charged, and so switched over to computer science. He graduated. Friend asked if he had ever heard of Bitcoin. His friend told him some about Bitcoin. He got him hooked on that around 2017, studied it, came up to speed. Him and his friend want to do something in the area, went to Vancouver, created an app. Business owners let them know that the app wouldn't work for paying Bitcoin as well. So did a few other things with Bitcoin, got in the field of analytics, and then made some connections in China. Project finished up phase 1, but didn't move to phase 2. Friend called him about a trading algorithm and got together with them, put some money in, brought on some experts, and launched, I think, what they're doing today. So with that much as a quick introduction, welcome on the podcast, Victor.
Wow, you really summed it up there. There's not much for me to say.
Well, hopefully there's a little bit more to say. Otherwise, it'll be our shortest episode yet. But no, I summarized what is a much longer journey. So maybe unpack it a bit. Tell us a little bit about, growing up journey, coming into the U.S. for college, and how your journey got started there.
Yeah, so growing up in Germany has its pluses and minuses. Quality of life is pretty good there, but for a certain type of personality, it doesn't really work that well, like the anti-authoritarian people. And I always had a problem with authority, and this troubled me greatly when it troubled my parents as well, trying to get a career going, because I pretty much knew I could never work in a corporate environment, just be hired by somebody and work there. Not that I'm difficult to work with, it's just that I don't like it. And so
I'm right there with you. I think there's a lot of business owners, startup small businesses, that part of the reason that they're doing that is because their personality is such a, hey, I like to do my own thing, figure out my own, or chart my own course, or do my own thing. And it doesn't always fit into the box of working for someone else. And so definitely understand and resonate right there with you.
Exactly. So I came over to Canada to study philosophy, because that was all I cared about, really. I had some fantastic professors in my first year, which completely convinced me that this is where I wanted to go. And I wanted to be a professor for philosophy. The issue was that, as you mentioned in the summary, as time went by, I kind of came into the field thinking, oh, this is philosophy. It's all about reasoned argumentation. I like to look at arguments. I like to read papers. I like to discuss things with people. Turns out that was more or less a misconception about the kind of political environment that academic philosophy is in right now. And more I was kind of turned off from the field by just my fellow students and some professors as well, because it was very political, and the kind of argumentation that was going on was not, in my opinion, very good. It served various political purposes, and I'm a profoundly non-political person, so I don't want to be involved with that. So then I thought, well, shit, I'm in my... Can I swear, by the way?
Try and keep it PG. We'll let that one slide, and the rest of it will be.
I was in my third year at the point, and I was getting nervous, because if philosophy wasn't going to work out for me, then what the hell was I going to do? So I took more science classes, computer science, statistics, and greatly enjoyed those. But by the time I graduated, I had a philosophy degree and nothing else, and I could say that I could do, computer science, but on paper I just didn't look very good, I think. And that's another reason why I eventually decided to go independent, because really I had no other choice. um, so if you don't have a backup plan, I think that's a good position to be in, especially if you're just fresh out of university. Yeah, so after I finished my studies, I then went to other universities, University of Washington, and I briefly spent a semester at Harvard, which was a great experience. After that, I went back to Germany and was kind of lost. I didn't really know what to do. On paper, I looked terrible. And I just talked to my friend who was still in university at the time, and he was studying mathematics. He introduced me to Bitcoin. I had kind of heard of Bitcoin before, but didn't really know anything about it. I thought it was, the latest gimmick, maybe.
It's still to be undetermined. Now, it's probably more legitimate than it used to be, but I still think people in the day to day are still trying to figure out what it means, other than they see in the news that it keeps going up in value.
Well, so in the early days, a lot of people had the experience, especially in the computer science field, they had the experience of being introduced to Bitcoin and immediately thinking that it's a scam, or that it's just nonsense. And they read about it, and they study it more and more, and they try to figure out ways in which it's a scam. And over time, they figure out this is actually really robust, and they become believers, so to speak, in the technology. Because no matter how you try to attack it or how you try to look at it, it just seems to work really, really well from a technical point of view. That's not to say that the price volatility and all this kind of stuff, that's all the speculation side of things, but the technology side of things is what gets people hooked, at least in the technology.
Right. No, and I think that definitely makes sense. And so you go back to Germany and you have a friend says, "Hey, have you looked into Bitcoin? It looks interesting." You take a look at it and say, "Yeah, it does look interesting." Piques your interest, and you get into it. And I think at that point, now remind me if that wrong, was that the point that you did your startup, where you started to look and explore whether businesses could use it as a form of accepting payment?
Yeah. So I at the time I had no idea how startups worked or how businesses worked, nothing like that. I just knew I wanted to do something with Bitcoin, and my friend was the same. So we just, I came back to Vancouver, and we just got together and we brainstormed a lot, and we knew we wanted to do something. And I had just completed a course in computer science in Java, which is what most Android applications are based on. And so I thought, okay, I'll just start coding something. And so I started creating this prototype, and my friend was going around local businesses and asking some of his contacts and saying, well, are you interested in Bitcoin? Are you interested in using this as a payment method? Perhaps it's this alternative currency, magic internet money. Nobody really knew what it was, but a lot of people were, a lot of business owners are, I guess, if somebody comes along and offers you something for free, that might help your business in some way, you're just going to say, okay, I'll try it.
Sure, sounds good. If it works out, great, I make more money. If it doesn't work out, you're the one that's out, not me, type of a thing.
Exactly. So, I mean, the app never got into, it went into the minimum viable product stage. So it worked, but it looked ugly, and it was, not very good. And right around that time, the Bitcoin Mania started, the hype cycle started. I don't know if you remember 2017, but it started to get really crazy. The prices went up and up and up, and people were just getting into it. And around that time, we kind of noticed that nobody wanted to pay for anything with Bitcoin, because if you think that, if you have $100 Bitcoin now and you think tomorrow it's going to be $200, then why would you spend it on anything, right? So that's kind of the issue with deflationary currencies, is they disincentivize spending. So the whole payment app idea really was not a good idea, and we noticed more and more trouble with the fundamental concept of it, which was that even if these business owners now had Bitcoin, what would they do with it? Like, they had to switch it over into fiat currency, because presumably they had expenses they had to pay, they had to buy products, they had to pay their employees. So you have to switch it anyway. And at the time, that bridge between crypto and fiat was incredibly undeveloped. So it cost anywhere between 5 and 10% to actually switch Bitcoin into Canadian dollars or American dollars, depending on where you were. The ATMs were the worst. They were 12% or so. There were some companies, some broker companies doing it, but they had high percentages as well. And the way to do it back then was just to reach out on Craigslist or find someone you knew who had Bitcoin, and you would meet them in a cafe and give them cash, and they give you Bitcoin. So that was really early days. So yeah, we kind of scrapped the idea of the payment app. didn't really work out. But we still knew we wanted to do something in space. So what we did was precisely that. We saw that the market was going crazy. Everyone wanted to get their hands on Bitcoin. We knew how to get Bitcoin. So why don't we just offer our services to people to get Bitcoin? So we
Now, one question just on that, because you have a way you think is a good idea, and I think maybe not, but my limited understanding of Bitcoin is it was tended to originally set up to be more of a non-governmental stable currency that could almost be used as an exchange or for buying things and that, and then it almost kind of morphed into where people are speculating it or holding on to it because it kept going up and up and up, and so it kind of switched from its original or intended purpose. But as you're going through that, trying to originally use it as a startup and do it as, people can use it as in order to purchase things. And I even remember when it first came out, or there was one of the first shows, and it was on Netflix or Amazon or something, where people tried to live live a month only using Bitcoin for any transactions they did, and how difficult it was and how it really didn't work very well. But with all of that said, as you're trying to get that up and going, was there kind of a point where you're just saying, hey, this is not going to work with, not enough businesses are using it, or if they are using it, nobody's adopting it? Or how did you kind of come to the determination that while it may have been in theory, a good idea, when you tried to put it into business practice, it wasn't working out?
I wouldn't say it was a particular point in time. It was kind of a gradual recognition that this wasn't really where it was at. And then also at the same time, this other opportunity came along where we said, we can make way more money, and we can make money right away by just buying and selling Bitcoin to people who wanted to buy it. And our clients were mostly like lawyers. In fact, the Jewish community in Vancouver was one of our first clients, and they all recommend each other. So that was very good for us. To an extent, the debate still rages on. As you mentioned, the original intent of Bitcoin was a peer-to-peer digital cash. But the Bitcoin maximalists have very much argued for a long time, and probably still do, that once Bitcoin is big enough, once it's universally accepted, once all that happens, then the price stability will happen. But if we look at other asset classes and other commodities and everything, we don't really see that. Even gigantic commodities like gold or copper or anything like that, you don't really have price stability. So that's kind of, I think, unlikely to happen. But people still hold on to it. El Salvador just declared it a national currency, right? Under the assumption that it is actually a currency. And I fall on the side of things where I say it's not really a currency. It's some sort of asset. Yeah. Anyway.
All right. But so now, so you come to that realization, it's kind of creeping, kind of comes at over a slow period of time, just saying, hey, we've tried this, had some people initially adopted it, didn't work, and eventually came to a point that, okay, the business idea isn't going to work out, or isn't going to be accepted. So at that point, then where did things take you from there? Where did the journey go from there?
Yeah. So like I said, we just hustled a lot, running around town, selling Bitcoin and buying Bitcoin and making money off of the difference. Eventually it became so heated that we got turned off of that whole thing, because we saw a lot of scammers entering the space. People put their life savings into it. It got uncomfortable to the point where old ladies were asking us to put in, all their savings because their nephew had told them that the 0x token was going to be the next big thing, right? So at that point, we refused to sell anymore, and it got too wild. So we got out basically around the peak, and then we got into consulting, because around that time, Ethereum really came into the limelight. ICOs went crazy. People wanted to do token offerings for everything. And I remember one specific meeting I went to at actually the university's Bitcoin club. They had a guest speaker who was one of the founders of Axiom Zen, which created the CryptoKitties, if you remember that. So that was really mind-blowing, because it showed to me, it really enlightened how much Ethereum was capable of and what you could do with it, and that this was really an interesting future pathway to go. And of course, CryptoKitties, essentially all of the NFT mania that's going on right now, it's all based on CryptoKitties, more or less. So anyway, we became consultants. We gave talks at law firms. We helped some companies do their tokenomics. We came up with all kinds of ideas. We got very interested in stablecoins. We contributed some articles kind of to the general canon, I suppose, theorizing about stablecoins, talking about stablecoins. And then we got into analytics. So if you know Bitcoin, you know that it's kind of an open ledger. It's transparent, which means that every single transaction since the beginning of Bitcoin can be traced. And of course, there's no names attached to those transactions. It's just the Bitcoin addresses that are openly available. However, based on a bunch of heuristic and statistical methods, you could group numbers of addresses together, and you can kind of figure out what belongs where and the movements of the coins through the network. And once you know that one Bitcoin address belongs to, for instance, an exchange or a person or a dark market, once you know that, you can kind of you can trace it through the network and kind of make these connections and say, okay, these group of addresses probably belong to Binance, or these group of addresses belong to this dark market. And we saw that there was a need for that, because as crypto was becoming more mainstream, crypto businesses, especially on exchanges, they were becoming more and more worried about regulation and KYC laws and anti-money laundering laws. And so they wanted to make sure somehow that the crypto that they had on their platform and from their clients was clean and wasn't used for terrorist financing, for instance, or illicit financial purposes. So they started to require these services where there was a bunch of companies. Chainalysis, for instance, was one of them. There was one in Vancouver called Blockchain Intelligence Group. They sold their services to not only companies, financial companies, exchanges, but also law enforcement, CIA, FBI, these kinds of places. We became interested in that, and through a connection in China, we found out that China was very interested in this, of course. So we were one of those, I suppose, startups that got poached by the Chinese, and we raised a bunch of money in China, or our Chinese partners did, and then we flew over to China. We opened up an office in Shenzhen and hired a bunch of developers and developed a software tool to help the clients, the eventual clients of the company, which would include the government, trace cryptocurrency transactions and make sure that, or at least increase the likelihood that these transactions weren't illicit somehow. It was a fascinating experience in China. I was there for a little over a month. And then our office existed there for about 6 months until COVID hit, and then everything shut down. And then our Chinese partners couldn't come up with funding for the next round of investment. So that whole project kind of just went away, unfortunately. But it was still a fascinating experience. The way business is done in China is very different than here. Everything is based on connections with the party, but local party. And our Chinese partners had those connections, and many times we had kind of a full day of work, and then in the evenings we went out to fancy dinner places with these party officials, and they got blind drunk. They drank a lot. The way they drink is they force you to drink. They all toast each other, and then you have to drink, and they get so drunk that they go away and throw up, and they come back and drink more. And they almost never discuss business during these meetings, but it's kind of building that connection, and then they just hand wave it away and say, yes, we'll do it. It's no problem. Or like, yeah, you're in the circle now of doing this business.
So now one question, just to kind of fast forward. So now COVID hits and you say, oh, it sounded like it was a pretty interesting business. It was gaining traction. And then unfortunately COVID hit and things went away. So now you're kind of here, the second time saying, okay, we've tried our second startup. again didn't work out. Now this time for different reasons. There wasn't initially demand, but because people, or because of circumstances outside your control, it kind of went away. So then kind of where did you guys go from there? Where did your journey take you from there?
Right. Yeah. So luckily, I think a lot of people aren't in this position, but luckily we were in the position where we just made enough money off of our startups to keep going. So they weren't big successes. They kind of failed, or it didn't work out, or something else happened. But they just made enough money for us to hang in there, right? And I think that was really important, because otherwise we would have just had to stop at some point, right? So we got back from China, COVID happened, nothing worked out. And then a friend called me who I had met in the crypto community here. And he approached me with a project that he had been working on, which was a trading algorithm. And I was at this point very skeptical of trading algorithms. In fact, I've written articles about trading algorithms, and I've tested some of them that were like available. Gecko, I think one of them was called. And basically my stance at that time was that trading algorithms rely solely on solely on data that's in the market. And my argument was that that wasn't sufficient data to reliably predict the prices. So my argument was that pure technical analysis was not possible in the long run, because there's just not enough data in the market to make those predictions consistently. And I was soundly proven wrong by my friend's ingenious algorithm, which uses a combination of AI and sophisticated mathematical kind of models and execution strategies. And yeah, it worked out really well. We put our own money in, tested it out for a long time, saw kind of all kinds of scenarios happen, and addressed those problems. Founded a company around it to make everything official and have it all be secured IP wise. And then we started inviting our friends and our business network into this algorithm, which made a lot of money relatively consistently. And then at some point it became so big that we decided we needed to, this was becoming a liability just from a regulations point of view. We can't just hold all this money from people, and we're not licensed or regulated brokers or financial entities or anything like that, right? So we decided we needed a more sophisticated structure. So we got together with another Vancouver company, Huvist, who had all the licenses. They were fund administrators, wealth managers, and they created an offshoot fund that they own, and we licensed the software out to them. And we're doing the same thing in the British Virgin Isles right now, and possibly in the Middle East. So the company, our company, by the way, is Eon Labs, and it's high frequency trading for cryptocurrency futures. It's a bit of a mouthful, but
hey, I don't know if I would be able to get the mouthful off every time, but I think the technology sounds cool, and it sounds like a fun journey. So no, that definitely makes sense, and it's interesting how you kind of, it sounds like with each portion of your journey, you learned a little bit more. You tried some businesses, they incrementally got more success, and then this latest business is even gaining further traction. So that's definitely exciting. So well, now as we've kind of walked through your journey, got a bit up to where we're at in the present, great time to transition to the two questions I always ask at the end of each podcast. So the first question I always ask is, along that journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made, and what'd you learn from it?
the worst one, I think, was working with the wrong people. But it's often impossible to tell who the wrong people are. Hindsight 2020, of course. But the red flags were always there, but I chose to ignore them because there was always a financial opportunity, or it was too tasty to say no, or, you know, when you're kind of young and hungry, you definitely tend to take more risks, and you are willing to ignore the red flags. But one of the things I would say is that if there are red flags, definitely be skeptical, because it can turn into a real headache later on. And an older businessman who kind of is a kind of mentor to me, he said that businesses fail for two reasons, essentially. They either run out of money or ego. And I've had an experience where it was, well, I've actually had both experiences, but the ego part is definitely, I think, even more dangerous than running out of money. So that was,
No, and I think there's a lot of truth. And I mean, I think that, it is hard because you get into startups and people are, by definition, people are getting into startups because they think they're smarter, can do it better, improve
and the thing is,
upon what other people think. And so you kind of have to have that personality, but there is that point of you have to get people that, while they are smart and intelligent and can do things and are motivated and willing to take risks, you also have to have that balance of personalities to where it isn't just, ego driven, and it isn't just, people trying to show that they're better or smarter, but actually convert it over into a product. So I think that definitely makes sense. So second question I always ask is, talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what'd be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
I always say you need, there's three things that you need, essentially. You can get along with one of them barely. If you have two things, it's good. If you have all three, that's great. Namely, the one thing is you can be an expert. If you're an expert in the field, that's already a great start, right? You could have the money. If you have a bunch of money, that's already a great start as well. You can buy the expertise, or you can have the right connections, which is another hugely important piece. And if you have all three of those, then you're basically set. If you're none of those, then you might want to work on being an expert or getting the money or getting the connections.
Well, I think that's great advice, and I like how it's, hey, you might be able to get by with one, two, you'll do well, and three, you'll be successful. So I think that's definitely a great piece of advice for all the listeners. So, well, as we wrap up now, if people want to reach out to you, they want to learn more, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Well, people can visit our website, eonlabs.com, or reach out to me. I don't really have Twitter and social media, so yeah, eonlabs.com is probably the best way to reach us. There's a contact form. And
all right, well, I definitely encourage everybody to check out the website, reach out to them.
LinkedIn works as well, actually. Sorry.
All right, LinkedIn works as well. Either way, reach out to them, make connections, and definitely is a great resource, especially if you're looking to get into cryptocurrency. So with that, appreciate you coming on the podcast. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. Just go to inventiveguest.com, apply to be on the show. Also, make sure to like and subscribe and share the podcast so everyone can find out about our awesome episodes and learn more. Last but not least, if you ever need help with patents, trademarks, or anything else, feel free to reach out to us by going to strategymeeting.com, and we're always here to help. Well, thank you again. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thank you so much for having me. Alrighty.